Welcome back to our 21 Politics channel. We continue to see what is happening from over the world. Follow us to know more interesting information. Recently, Joe Biden have made a rage for Alaska government, Dunleavy, when issues decision for Arctic drilling suspension. As claim from Alaska government, Joe Biden are open the way for other countries to pass US, the Russians, the Chinese, the Saudis, the Iranians. They are laughing all the way to the bank. Let's learn more about that. Alaska Republican government Mike Dunleavy called President Joe Biden's decision to suspend Arctic drilling leases is plainly irrational and unproductive during a Wednesday interview on Your World with Neil Cavuto. It's illogical. It's irrational. It doesn't make any sense, he said. Dunleavy explained that Biden's move will only transfer American opportunities in energy, dominance, and independence to other countries. That's what this administration seems to be all about, is canceling opportunity, he said. Canceling oil leases in the Arctic, canceling offshore leases. This is going to drive the cost up, and it's going to push these opportunities overseas. The governor called this suspension a lose-lose-lose for not only the U.S., but also 4 areas across the globe that lack the same environmental protections. Dunleavy expressed that even though the decision did not come as a surprise, there are still zero benefits to Alaska and the country as a whole. The Russians, the Chinese, the Saudis, the Iranians, they are laughing all the way to the bank, he said. They're taking advantage of these opportunities that we're handing them in the long run. This is going to be detrimental to this country. Back in February, the Biden administration announced a ban on all oil and gas leases on federal lands. Governors like Mark Gordon criticized the decision at the time as destructive for his state. Dunleavy echoed that sentiment. Across the board here, this doesn't make any sense. Not unexpected, but makes no sense. That is the end of the first report. Now we are going to turn to the second one. California Task Force holds first meeting to study reparations for slave descendants. A California task force to study reparations for Black Americans who descended from slaves held its first meeting Tuesday, launching a 2-year process that organizers hope will compensate for the federal government's inaction on the issue. The 9-member task force, appointed by Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom, is made up of the descendants of slaves, including legislative leaders, prominent lawyers, and academics. I'm so thankful to my ancestors, who survived so much trauma, so much pain, so much tragedy, so much brutality so that I could live, said Lisa Holder, a civil rights attorney in Los Angeles. And I am ready to fight to deliver them, our ancestors, justice. Tuesday's meeting of the First State Reparations Committee in the U.S. came as President Joe Biden commemorated the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, where hundreds of Black people were murdered by a white mob in what was then a thriving African American community. It also comes just over a year after George Floyd, a Black man, was murdered by a white police officer in Minnesota. California Secretary of State Shirley Wilbur, who as a state assemblywoman authored the state legislation creating the task force, noted the opportunity to right a historic wrong that continues today. Your task is to determine the depth of the harm and the ways in which we are to repair that harm, said Weber, whose parents were sharecroppers forced to leave the South. Critics have argued that California did not have slaves as in other states and should not have to study reparations or pay for it. But Weber said the state is an economic powerhouse that can point the way for a federal government that has been unable to address the issue. It would not replace any reparations agreed to by the federal government. Members of the task force said Black Americans have heard all their lives that they need to improve themselves, yet have been held back by racism and discriminatory laws that prevented them from getting conventional bank loans and purchasing homes. We have lost more than we have ever taken from this country. We have given more than has ever been given to us, task force member and state senator Stephen Bradford said. A federal slavery reparations bill, commonly referred to as H.R. 40, has languished in Congress since it was first introduced in 1989. It passed out of the House Judiciary Committee in April, but it faces steep odds. The task force's duties include summarizing discrimination against Black people in law and in the private and public sectors, calculating compensation, and educating the public on its findings, and crafting an apology. The third report will start with Article AOC calls for the Senate to abolish the filibuster amid voting rights showdown. GOP used first filibuster under Biden last week to block January 6th commission. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on Wednesday Ray upped her calls for the Senate to eliminate the legislative filibuster so Democrats can pass sweeping reforms while in control of Congress and the White House. The New York Democrat voiced her support for getting rid of the 60-vote threshold in response to a tweet from President Biden on Wednesday. Biden called for the passage of major federal voting rights legislation to combat the all-out assault on our democracy as GOP-led states change their election laws. Abolish the filibuster, the Progressive Squad member posted in response to Biden's tweet. The House already passed the massive election overhaul legislation, known as H.R. 1. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, DNY, said he'd bring the election legislation up for a vote in the Senate later this month, which would set the stage for a big clash on whether Democrats jettison the Senate tradition of a 60-vote threshold. Tensions around the filibuster debate escalated when Republicans last week used their first legislative filibuster during the Biden presidency to block consideration of forming a bipartisan commission to investigate the January 6 Capitol riot. Democrats needed 10 Republicans to join them in a procedural vote to start debate on the legislation, but just 6 Republicans broke rank, effectively killing the commission legislation that former President Donald Trump opposes. Now Democrats want to pass their top legislative priority, the election reform bill known as the For the People Act, which would set federal standards for voting access and establish publicly financed congressional elections. It's a priority for Biden, as well. Republicans are united in their opposition to the legislation, which they've panned as a federal takeover of elections. But it's not even clear that Democrats could get all 50 of their members on board to pass, as with Senator Joe Manchin, DW, a holdout and repeat defender of the filibuster. Even Biden Tuesday issued a veiled rebuke of Manchin and Senator Kyrsten Sinema, a moderate from Arizona, who has also resisted nuking the filibuster. Biden laid blame Tuesday on 2 Democrats for failure to pass the voting rights legislation. I hear all the folks on TV saying, why doesn't Biden get this done? The president said in an address after meeting survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre. Well, because Biden only has a majority of effectively 4 votes in the House and a tie in the Senate, with 2 members of the Senate who vote more with my Republican friends, he added. Rare public rebuke of members of his own party. Ocasio-Cortez and her progressive colleagues in the House have long been in favor of abolishing the filibuster, so Democrats can deliver on big agenda items they say voters elected them to enact, including D.C. statehood, police reform, gun control legislation, and social safety net programs. Preserving the filibuster is not worth letting millions of people in this country go hungry, sleep in their cars, or struggle to afford baby formula, Ocasio-Cortez tweeted back in February. That's the end of today. If you like this video, do not hesitate to like and press subscribe below. We will come back with more interesting information in next videos.